Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sir Hunt on X on this Tuesday, the 2nd of December, 2025. As I come to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Cold and snowy weather hit the tri state and sure parts of the country also, because it is December and that time of year has come. Lots of snow work I had to do with the driveway earlier today, excuse me. Brought out the tractor, shoving it all off. Now I got a clean driveway and I'm able to maneuver my car up and down the driveway as prepare to go to my line of work in the next couple of days. I mean, always nice to have a big fat tractor to clean up your driveway and just melt the snow all away. And that's what happened earlier today. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Tonight is a one topic show, and the one topic covers two fights on the same card. But little do we know, these two fights on the same card started off a run that led to a giant super fight 8 years later. This was the night of November 30th, 1979, at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, ABC's Wide World of Sports. All you old-timers know ABC Wide World of Sports. Spanning the globe, thrill of victory, agony of defeat, the skier falling down the hill about 80 times upside down, 40 times sideways, 60 times in a diagonal direction, as bad as the Hindenburg disaster. That was ABC Wide World of Sports. And, of course, the great Howard Cosell. And it was a massive free TV doubleheader for two high-level world championships. And you can probably say this started something for the next 8-9 years. It was a doubleheader that first featured Vito Antuofermo defending his undisputed middleweight title against marvelous Marvin Hagler. And in the main event, it was a standout welterweight champ Wilfred Benitez defending his title against Sugar Ray Leonard. Think about this. Two legit lineal world championships. The challengers on that night were Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard sharing the doubleheader. I'll get to that part in a second. Of course, I'll trace to what happened down the line with Four Kings, the Banquet in Baltimore, and how it led to the super fight between the two down the line. 1976 Olympics, we know what happened. Sugar Ray Leonard won the gold medal. Marvin Hagler lost in the Olympic trials. Leonard became the U.S. rep to represent the United States. He got the big hits early because his first fight, he probably got some crazy number. I think like somebody got $100,000 right off the bat. Well, Marvin Hagler was an afterthought, as when he came up, he had to just fight frequently just to sake to make a dime. And we talk about the two paths going to this before this double header. You know, one guy had the glitz and glamour, the other guy had the blue collar, take the hard road approach as if you were riding on a railroad train, because that's what Marvin Hagler did. And for those couple years, Leonard hit the fast track to stardom, while Hagler was building his record as his career was going on. And we talk about Marvin Hagler's road. He was because he felt slighted because all the attention was focused on other fighters like Ray Leonard, and because of it, he had to take the road to basically prove himself with a chip on his shoulder, so he can get to the particular level. And that's what Hagler had to do going to this particular fight with the first of the two fights he had with Vito Antuofermo. Now, we talk about Vito Antuofermo was one of the more longer middleweight champions at the time. Going into this particular fight, we talk about Antuofermo. He was a slight favorite because he was more recognized. But when you think of the road Hagler took to get to this point, you had a feeling he's going to come in and make something of it. Now, let me remind everyone before I divulge into the fight. Congressman of the state of Massachusetts wrote letters to Bob Arum, the promoter of Top Rank, who also promoted all four of these fighters, Antuofermo, Hagler, Benitez, and Leonard, basically telling Bob Arum, get Marvin Hagler a title shot, or we're going to have to talk to you. And Bob Arum said, okay, we'll get him a title shot. That's exactly what happened. We talk about this fight of November 30th, 1979, the first of this doubleheader. It was essentially the first title defense for Antuofermo after he beat Hugo Coro to win the middleweight title, taking on marvelous Marvin Hagler, who came into this fight. We talk about having to take the hard road. This guy had a record of 46-2-2. This is basically his 51st fight, and he finally gets a title shot. I'll touch on the comparison here in a second. So we have this first of this wild ABC doubleheader and a star-studded doubleheader where it was a global event. And you talk about a coming out party. This is the moment Marvin Hagler was waiting for, but he felt still slighted because he was sharing a twin bill with Sugar Ray Leonard. And we know the fame that Ray Leonard got to that point, was the golden boy looks, the afro as big as a national debt, and the charm and the looks that rubbed Marvin Hagler off the wrong way. He wanted his own main event. Bob Arum said, "You wanted a title shot, you got it. Go out there and fight the fight." And Hagler just said, "Okay, I'll fight it." And when he finally got the title shot, extra adrenaline came through with Marvin Hagler because this was the moment he had clamored for, and it took 50 fights to get it against the tough champion Vito Antuofermo, who's making his first title defense after beating Hugo Coro, albeit under some odd circumstances. When we talk about this particular fight between Hagler and Antuofermo, the real story here was Marvin Hagler came out blazing and took the fight to Antuofermo, started to deliver a beating because he knew it was an opportunity. And Antuofermo was basically a target for Marvin Hagler, who showed his variety of skills out of the southpaw stance. Box, mix it up, power, underrated speed that doesn't get talked about enough, ring generalship. He showed it all, built a massive lead early, and looked like he was going to run away with it, and had the fight basically under control. And basically, he did everything he wanted to. He made an example out of Vito Antuofermo, who said after winning the title from Coro under odd circumstances, Hagler had the fight under control for the most part, and looked like he was going to pull away to win this particular fight. However, from about rounds, a couple of the middle rounds, Antuofermo showed his courage, came on, took a couple of the middle rounds as Hagler took the foot off the gas a little bit. So the narrow fight started to narrow a little bit. But as rounds 9 through 12 began, Hagler started really putting a hurting on Antuofermo, started to deliver a beating, and Antuofermo's face, you couldn't recognize him, and Hagler just pounded him to the next 4 rounds, basically sweeping rounds 9 through 12 effortlessly without breaking a sweat. I mean, that's how this fight was starting to come up. And having that fight basically won at that point, Hagler again took the foot off the gas pedal. Antuofermo wins 2 of the final 3 rounds to, at least to the naked eye, even though he won those rounds, still was basically beat up because Marvin Hagler controlled this fight from start to finish. I mean, everything you want in a Marvin Hagler fight, you got it. I mean, the southpaw stance, the conventional stance, power, speed, ring generalship, and determination, will, skill. He showed it. Antuofermo had little to offer of anything in this night. And as a result, the fight went to the whole 15 rounds. And everyone thought Marvin Hagler was going to walk away with the decision. But it was announced after the fight that it was declared a draw. One judge inexplicably had Antuofermo winning, one had Hagler winning, and the other one had it even. It was widely regarded as probably the most egregious decision in boxing history at the time, given everything that took place. Now, those around Marvin Hagler try to tell him it's a draw, it's not a loss, because Marvin Hagler was fuming after the fight, rightfully so, because he was victimized. I talked about last night with the Tyrone Everett Alfredo Escalera fight. Marvin Hagler was victimized just as bad, if not worse than that. And we talk about how this fight wound up. And Marvin Hagler, people try to calm him down. Hagler said it best. It was a draw. I lost for one simple reason. I didn't win the title. Antuofermo kept it. And that caused all kinds of chaos when we talk about the decision after the fight, all the questions, everything that took place. But maybe the grand scheme of things, maybe the boxing gods, if you want to call them, told Marvin Hagler, you're going to be a champion someday, but you need a longer, harder road. But that's how it's perceived to be in the boxing public. So we talk about getting that 50th fight, getting that moment, and controlling the fight, but having it snatched away from you because the boxing intelligentsia didn't like you. Yeah, Marvin Hagler felt slighted, and it was time for him to go to the extra well. And that was basically the end of Antuofermo. I'll touch on those two here in a brief second, because that was part of what's about to come down the line. Now we're going to fast forward to, that was Antuofermo Hagler 1. Now we're going to go to Sugar Ray Leonard versus Wilfred Benitez, the second of this ABC doubleheader. I mean, how would you like to be a fight fan back in those days when you had a doubleheader that featured Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard on free TV? That's what we had with this. And it was the main event on that night. When you talk about Sugar Ray Leonard versus Wilfred Benitez for the undisputed welterweight title. Interesting storyline. We talk about Wilfred Benitez before I divulge with Ray Leonard because we know the story with him. We talk about Wilfred Benitez, a standout out of Puerto Rico. He turned pro at a super young age, was unthought of at age 15, coming out of Puerto Rico, trained by his brothers, Freddie and Gregory Benitez, and was nicknamed the Radar for his, his ability to see and duck his opponent's punches. Won a world title in 1976. Fought the standout Antonio Cervantes. Won a welterweight title, lightweight title, but wasn't awarded it due to age. So he moves up and challenges the welterweight champion Carlos Palomino, a well-respected Latino fighter. Beats him on a 15-round split decision, albeit under weird circumstances, to win the world title in a fight where all kinds of chaos ensued in the Latino community. And he got the decision. It was shortly after that, Leonard saw this and said, "Give me Benitez." And that's why we had this of the second of this ABC doubleheader that took place 46 years ago in Las Vegas. Now we talk about this particular fight with Leonard and Benitez. Story with this one is a contrast of styles. Maybe it had the most intense stare down in championship history when Wilfred Benitez destroyed a dagger, and for a minute it looked like there was fear in Ray Leonard's eyes. I mean, Ray Leonard looked like he was intimidated a little bit. We talk about facing Wilfred Benitez. Ray Leonard even said, Wilfred Benitez was a better fighter and more skilled than I was, but I had more heart. As I'm going to talk about here in a second. You talk about this night, this fight itself. The story here was Benitez did everything he could, but Leonard just had all the answers. Early on in this fight, he got the early knockdown, and we talk about flooring him with a perfectly placed, we call the shotgun jab, which is a quick jab that puts you in the seat of your pants. That's what Leonard did in round 3, and that was a sign of things to come. Even though Benitez came on in the middle rounds and showed the whole world why he was called the Radar, making Leonard miss and making him pay and having his moments, Leonard kept the foot on the gas and kept at him. A headbutt clash in the 6th round opened a nasty cut on Benitez, but he didn't go after the cut. Angel Dundee said, go to this guy's body, start to weaken him, and that's when the fight really changed. And as the fight was going on, Leonard started to deliver the beating, and at the with 30 seconds left in the 15th round, a combination led with a left uppercut by Leonard floored Benitez, and as the fight was closing to an end, Leonard started to pile on the beating, and the fight was stopped with 6 seconds left in the 15th round, and Sugar Ray Leonard won the first of his many world titles on an impressive 15th round knockout in his coming out party to win the welterweight championship. ABC free TV doubleheader, Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard. How would you love to have that across your television screens? That's what it was in 1979. Both delivered. One was wrongfully back up. One of them was victimized. The other one ended it with exclamation points. And little did we know, it set the stage for many things to come. Touch on that in a second. Back to these two fights here for a second. We talk about these two challengers on this night, Hagler and Leonard. The roads to what took place down the line couldn't have been more parallel. I mean, more perpendicular. One had the glitz and glamour. The other one had the blue collar, grit and grind approach. And that's what we had with us moving forward. And for Marvin Hagler, he said after the draw to Antifermo, he essentially said, I'm no longer leaving fights to the judges. I'm letting my fist do the talking. Because from that point, he really went to the next level and started to put the foot on the gas. And we talk about what he did after this fight. He eventually got another title shot against Alan Minter. After Minter beat Antuofermo, and they go to England, excuse me. And after racist taunts by Alan Minter toward Marvin Hagler, Hagler said, "I'm getting this guy in the ring. He's stupid. I'm going to make him pay." And he delivered a 3-round beating to Alan Minter, and the fight was essentially over to become the undisputed middleweight champion. So Hagler finally reached his pedestal to become the middleweight champ, to match Leonard's pedestal when Leonard beat Benitez to win the welterweight championship. Now, their parallels got real interesting. Parallels and perpendicular, if you want to call it. I say this for this reason. Even though he won the world title, no one wanted to give Marvin Hagler the credit because Marvin Hagler was rubbed off by the boxing intelligentsia for how outspoken he was on certain things. And we talk about Ray Leonard. He was a quiet boy, the glitz and glamour that rubbed off the boxing public the right way because he fell more in love with Leonard than Hagler. Hagler didn't like it, and because of it, the boxing intelligentsia was rubbed off the wrong way, and that's why Hagler never got his due credit. Was unfortunate. And show you how he didn't get his due credit after he stopped Minter. The ring was littered with debris, and they had to escort Hagler out of the ring, covered over multiple ropes by his brothers, Goody and Pat Petronelli. And that should tell you what Marvin Hagler had to go up against moving forward. While Leonard, after he beat Benitez, now started to target the big names. The big names Hagler wanted in his weight class, but couldn't get. So now we have some real interesting stuff here that's about to take place after this doubleheader, because it concluded the 70s, and we start to head to the 80s, and we know what that meant in the 80s, which was the start of Four Kings. Leonard won his title. Hagler won his, going to early in 1980. Hagler won his title. Also was Thomas Hearns, who fought earlier in that day in his hometown, winning a 6-round decision. And also laying in the weeds was Roberto Duran. And now we have all the fun. And we talk about, I mentioned before about the Four Kings. Now I'm going to just isolate it now to simply Leonard and Hagler, because this tonight's all about. You can probably say it started with this doubleheader, because little did we know they was going to have crossing paths at some point. I mean, you could probably say it started when Marvin Hagler asked Bob Arum, why I was fighting on a Ray Leonard undercard. And Arum said, "You wanted a title shot? There it is. Just go fight." From that point forward, as Leonard was getting the big fights, Marvin Hagler, after he won the title, was taking a case of taking names and beating everybody in his path, which included a rematch with Antuofermo, where he just gave Antuofermo the beating of his life in a 4-round stoppage, in a fight where Antuofermo tried every illegal tactic imaginable, and Marvin Hagler just pounded him into submission. And Hagler took care of that business. While that was going on, Sugar Ray Leonard was marching his march to welterweight history. After winning the title from Benitez, he would make a title defense before he lost to Roberto Duran in Montreal in June of 1980. But of course, 5 months later, he would get the world welterweight title back in No Mas. And a year later, he would get the Superfight against Thomas Hearns of September 16, 1981. We know the story of that one, the ebbs and flows, to where that fight was stopped in the 14th round, and Ray Leonard won the undisputed welterweight title. And while that was going on, Marvin Hagler was still taking names. But maybe the one moment they could probably say where the paths really started to cross was after Sugar Ray Leonard retired because of his attached retina, as Marvin Hagler got a second fight against a fighter named Fabricio Obelmias, a fighter he knocked out once before, knocks him out a second time in 1 round over in Italy. And it was after that knockout, as Sugar Ray Leonard, who was doing commentary for HBO, Marvin Hagler approaches Ray Leonard for a fight, and a setup for a banquet in Baltimore was set for Ray Leonard. And wondering what Ray Leonard was going to do, Marvin Hagler said, he's not going to retire. We got a lot of money to make. Let's make this fight and make all this money. And a seed was about to be planted, but there was that banquet in Baltimore that took place a few months later. And on that night, maybe if you want to call it this, an embarrassment took place. But it's a debate on who's more embarrassed. Because Ray Leonard had the banquet, invited Marvin Hagler, and people like Muhammad Ali and Howard Cosell were at this. And in the middle of that banquet, where Ray Leonard was recognized, he points toward Marvin Hagler and basically says, "A fight with me and this man would be the richest fight in boxing history, but it's never going to happen." And he essentially retires on that night. Now, later it's revealed Ray Leonard wasn't behaving himself, even if by his own admission, he got hit up on whatever he was doing in the backstage before he came out. But the thing is, at this event, you talk about this banquet in Baltimore, who was more embarrassed? Marvin Hagler by being suckered in to this event, or Ray Leonard simply saying, we're not fighting to Marvin Hagler's face? You can probably see both guys were embarrassed because the whole thing was just a waste in 82. And at that point, Ray Leonard put himself on the sideline, but back at it went Marvin Hagler. Sure. In the middle of all of that, Marvin Hagler gets a set date, and after that, a tentative set date with Thomas Hearns in 82, but supposedly a broken pinky finger pushed that fight aside and really had Hagler off the edge, saying to Thomas Hearns, if I would have had a pinky broken like you, I would have had that thing cut off. And that was basically riled Marvin Hagler up. And now Marvin Hagler is once again trying to prove himself as his career was going on after this wild charade of Baltimore took place. Now, let's think about this for a second. He wants to fight Leonard, has a tentative fight set with Hearns. Both fell through the cracks. So what was Hagler left with? Roberto Duran. A year after this banquet, and we talk about this particular fight, Marvin Hagler knocked everybody out, and many thought he was going to steamroll Roberto Duran, who was still smarting from no moss and a loss to Kirkland Lang. Hagler, by his own admission, gives Duran so much respect, and has this fight winds up going the distance where Hagler had to buckle down and win the last 3 rounds. And while that's going on, Ray Leonard's doing whatever he wanted to do. He was doing commentary for HBO with Barry Tompkins and Larry Merchant, the best HBO trio, in my opinion. But a poignant moment after the Duran fight took place. And this is where a seed really starts to plant. You start to see their careers start to collide a little more. Roberto Duran revealed that Sugar Ray Leonard, who did the commentary for Hagler Duran on the replay version, approached him. And Duran basically told Ray Leonard to go out there and fight him, to go fight Marvin Hagler, because you can beat him. All you got to do is box him, just don't brawl with him. Because that's what Duran did for about the first 11 and a half rounds until Hagler said, "A heck with it. I'll buckle down and win this fight." And then the seeds started to get planted. But now here comes another parallel. Ray Leonard makes the comeback to fight Kevin Howard in the backyard of Marvin Hagler, which is Boston, Massachusetts. So Ray Leonard comes back right into the backyard of Marvin Hagler, who's sitting at ringside watching this. And Leonard knows it, sees it. Story with the Leonard Howard fight and Marvin Hagler at ringside was in the 4th round. A perfectly placed right hand by Kevin Howard flattened Ray Leonard, and Marvin Hagler was smiling in the audience. And when they showed the knockdown on the slow motion replay, and it was shown up on one of the screens up at the Centennial Coliseum in Worcester, Massachusetts, Marvin Hagler had a smile on his face. That tells you what was building and what was brewing between the two combatants. And it started with a doubleheader in 1979. Now, of course, Leonard came back to win the 9th round knockout and basically retired for good. That was his words. Back doing the HBO thing with Tompkins and Merchant, also part-time with CBS with Tim Ryan and Gail Clancy. Hagler still marches on. And we finally get with Hagler the super fight he had long waited for at the night where he has it to himself, because that's something he always wanted. The super fight of April 15th, 1985 against Thomas Hearns. And at that point, it was a case of the long buildup from the earlier postponement for one of the wilder buildups that took place in 21 cities in 12 days. And Marvin Hagler, who wanted that moment in the sun for the longest time, who didn't get it when he beat Alan Minter, it was robbed against Vito Antuofermo. And him and Thomas Hearns had probably the greatest 8-minute war in boxing history and the greatest first round of boxing history. But the drive and the determination of Marvin Hagler showed as he gradually wore down Hearns in an epic, timeless classic to win a third-round knockout, to reach the pedestal and the distinction of the best fighter pound for pound. But there was a jealous man at ringside who had to call this fight. That was none other than Sugar Ray Leonard, who was sort of not thrilled having to talk about Marvin Hagler's moment in the sun. When Barry Tompkins asked him, you could see the look on Leonard's face. Because Leonard worked hard to get to that point. But Marvin, he felt slighted now because Marvin Hagler trumped him and had the distinction of the best fighter pound for pound. And some called Hagler at that point the greatest of that generation. That didn't sit too well with Leonard. So now people are asking, will Ray Leonard come back against Marvin Hagler? And Marvin Hagler already moved on from it because, he was talking about retirement after that fight. But he got talked into a fight with John Mugabe from Bob Arum. And in a grueling 11-round war back and forth where both fighters just laid heavy lumber on one another, Marvin Hagler goes to the extra well to knock out Mugabe in the 11th round. But there was an interested spectator at ringside, a fellow named Sugar Ray Leonard, who saw this and finally said, I want Marvin Hagler. That was the 8-year timeline from the night of the doubleheader that involved Hagler and Leonard to now the super fight of April 6, 1987. Interesting parallels, perpendicular approaches, both guys with really roller coaster ups and downs when you think about it. Hagler probably say the steadiest of the two because he kept active while Leonard was in peaks and valleys. And that's what led to that super fight of April 6, 1987. Hey guys know the fight, knows the story of that one. A fight where, it's still debated over 40 years later who won Marvin Hagler versus Ray Leonard. But how they got to that point, you can probably say the seed was originally planted with a doubleheader that took place November 30th, 1979, when Marvin Hagler and Ray Leonard were fighting for world titles. Different approaches, different styles, how they got to that point. But you probably say that started it. They started to put the seeds that were planted, put the water on the seeds to have it grow during the middle of the Four Kings era with Hearns and Duran. But then didn't really start to grow until that Banquet of Baltimore, where Leonard just threw it in his face saying, I ain't fighting you anytime soon, and basically checked out. And water was kept pouring on, and it kept blooming and getting bigger, and the buildup was starting to get larger and larger and larger. And of course, Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler took different roads. And it's always going to be debated why Ray Leonard would manipulate all of this for that 5-year period from the Banquet of Baltimore to the actual fight of April 6, 1987. A lot of conspiracy theories are being thrown around, but it happened. They got it. In its own weird way, maybe the biggest fallacy Marvin Hagler had was when he finally agreed to the fight, conceding to Ray Leonard's demands. Because Hagler wanted the higher payday. He thought he was worthy of the higher payday. But to get the higher payday, he had to concede to Leonard's demands. Because it was well chronicled. 10-inch, the bigger gloves, bigger ring, and the 15 versus 12 rounds. Hagler said, you can have it. I want the bigger payday because I know I can still whoop you. And it backfired on Marvin Hagler on that night, and one of the most bigger backfires ever. And of course, the decision is still going to be hotly disputed, and it still is 38 years later. But the question always remains, two questions remain. Why did Ray Leonard manipulate to have this fight almost go past its expiration date because it was closing in on that point? And when the fight was happened during the agreements, why was Marvin Hagler conceding to Ray Leonard's demands when he was a champion and the #1 fighter in the sport? Still two questions. We talk about the parallels from that doubleheader all the way through the Banquet of Baltimore to that night in Worcester, Mass, where Sugar Ray Leonard was floored by Kevin Howard and Marvin Hagler was watching it at ringside, to Hagler Hearns, where Ray Leonard was calling that fight on HBO replay and wasn't thrilled, wanted to talk about it, to Ray Leonard being a spectator of the Hagler Mugabe fight, to what took place April 6, 1987. That doubleheader that night, little did we know it was the start of something. And we know when that era began, it started with that doubleheader and ended April 6, 1987. And we know everything that happened in between with the two all-time great combatants. And those are the both of them are. And the roads they took couldn't be any more different. I mean, one had the chip on his shoulder, one had the glamour, glitz, and golden boy look. And sometimes they felt slighted by the other on many occasions. I mean, Hagler always said, why Leonard? And then when Hagler got to that point, even though Ray Leonard wouldn't admit it, you can almost see it in his eyes. The night he beat Thomas Hearns, being Marvin Hagler, the spotlight now fell on Marvin Hagler, the spotlight Leonard had for the longest time before that night. And we go in and out of the ring sideline the way that Ray Leonard was in and out from 81 to the end. You're going to lose out on it. And it didn't sit well with him. And that's when everything happened. Now, of course, somewhere in the middle there, Hagler thought about retirement. And that's when Leonard said, I'm going to go get him. And it's always going to be questions from the Leonard angle why he waited to that point. I mean, I don't know what would have happened had they fought 5 years before they did. I mean, Hagler was a buzzsaw at that point. You'd probably say Leonard was an overfilled welterweight. I mean, you could probably say Hagler would have been the favorite, probably would have beat him, maybe. But sometimes when you marinate a super fight of this caliber, and it's talked about as long as it is, and when you have two iconic combatants like this that had the roads they took to get to this point, as they did before their fight in 87, started with that doubleheader. Sometimes maybe some fights we can overbuild it, but sometimes maybe overbuilding it might be the best thing. And in its own weird way, the overbuilding of Hagler Leonard of April 6, 1987 was probably the best thing that happened, because all kinds of records were set that night, in terms of crowds, viewership, finances, and of course the shocker that Ray Leonard pulled. Because you can build up to a certain point, and sometimes if you overbuild, it gets a little too much. But sometimes overbuilding it might be the best thing. Probably the case with this particular event. Now, granted, Leonard took a bit of a Bush League approach with the ins and outs, retiring for good after the Kevin Howard fight. Of course, he had the detached retina in the middle after the first fight with Thomas Hearns. That didn't help. And Marvin Hagler just kept plucking away, finally getting the big names he wanted, Duran, Hearns, and Mugabe along the way before the Leonard fight. But we trace back to this doubleheader, and we talked about how they got to that point. I mean, Ray Leonard, he got the title shot against Wilfred Benitez in his 27th fight. Marvin Hagler got the title shot against Vito Antuofermo. There are two counters in his 50th fight. That should tell you how different the fighters were. Now, it's always going to be this weird theory that, Ray Leonard did this on purpose. Perceptive-wise, you could probably say that. Keyword being perceptive-wise. I don't know. I'm not the one to speculate. But let's remind everybody of this. They got the fight. It happened. And everyone was treated to a delight, regardless of who they thought won, regardless of whether they thought it was too late. And in the end, even though Hagler lost, in his own weird way, everybody won. Because that's what everybody wanted. They wanted it, and they got it. And we trace back to the whole 8-year timeline. We talk about these two to get to this point. I mean, you can say seeds were planted here, here, and here. Maybe the first seed that was planted was this ABC doubleheader on free TV. That the whole world got a real showcase of the greatness of both Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard on one night. Not just on free TV, but those who saw the indoor pavilion of Caesar's Palace And that we don't see doubleheaders like that. We haven't seen a few like that ever since on free television, or maybe ever. But that might have been the seed that started what took place over the next 8 years. We talk about the paths to the super fight of Hagler and Leonard in 87. And in the middle of it, the Four Kings era. And of course, in the middle of it, we talk about Hagler Leonard, that wild banquet in Baltimore, which still raises questions why it happened and what was the purpose of it. Because nobody knows the story of that one legitimately. It's crazy when you think about it, because Marvin Hagler, for a while, he's basically said, he wanted the Leonard fight because, Leonard wasn't the cash cow. We all know that. We know how cash cows work in the sport. And when Leonard checked out the first time and Hagler was trucking on and got to that pound for pound level, he basically said at that point, if he wants to fight me, great. If not, no biggie. And then when Leonard came back, Hagler saw the dollar signs and says, I'm cashing out. I mean, if you want to say that's what happened. Now, Grant, everything that happened before that super fight of April 6, 1987, where he conceded to Leonard's demands, is also an eyebrow raiser. Because I said in my show, where I talked about Hagler Leonard earlier this spring, you're the number one fighter pound for pound, and that's what Marvin Hagler escalated to, worked so hard to get to, and he took a hard road. I mean, you talk about fighting for respect. Marvin Hagler fought that from the draw to Antuofermo all the way to that point. Why are you all of a sudden conceding to Ray Leonard's demands in a super fight just because you want a few extra dollars in your pocket? And we know what happened in the fight with that one. And for the remaining years until God took the soul of Marvin Hagler, deep down, he was probably kicking himself as to why he would do such a thing. That backfired on him. And how he fought in the Leonard fight was also backfiring also. As I talked about the fight before, everybody knows what happened with that one. Still hotly debated 38 years later, Hagler versus Leonard. Who won? I mean, everyone's going to have a consensus opinion. Hey, we thought Leonard won. Yeah, you're right. Excuse me. Yeah, Hagler won. You're right. Hey, we thought it was a draw. Yeah, you're right. That was Hagler Leonard. That's how it's always going to be. And of course, there's always talk about this, why there was no Hagler Leonard rematch. That was because Leonard was going to put Hagler through the same shtick again. And Marvin Hagler said, I ain't dealing with this drama. And the final closure of this wild roller coaster for Hagler and Leonard, not just the fight with the super fight of April of 87, but when the public demanded a rematch, they met at a banquet at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. And Ray Leonard went to Bob Arum to tell Marvin Hagler, let's get a rematch going. We're going to make a fortune. Bob Arum told Marvin Hagler to tell Marvin Hagler to take that offer and shove it up his you-know-what. Because I went through this guy once with all the drama and all the manipulation he put me through. I ain't going through it twice. Ain't happening. He's not going to use me. I'm getting out. And in a NBC Sports World interview with Marv Albert, Hagler basically said, since Leonard had no desire to give me a rematch, I'm just going to hang it up. Because at that point, Hagler had nothing left to prove. Well, Leonard, trucked on with his career longer than necessary. And maybe in its own weird way, Marvin Hagler's legacy escalated when he got out at the right time, for the simple reason that he saw the other three of the Four Kings, being Hagler, Leonard, Hearns, and Duran, carry on. And carry on way longer than it should. And Hagler, because he got out at the right time, knowing that might have been him, maybe you could say his place in history elevated because he knew when the right time was to get out. And he won the boxing intelligentsia big time that way because he probably saw something that nobody else did. All of this started with a blockbuster ABC Wide World of Sports free TV doubleheader that took place at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, November 30th, 1979, when Marvin Hagler was victimized by boxing politics in a draw against Vito Antuofermo, and Sugar Ray Leonard won the welterweight title from Wilfred Benitez. And the careers, one stayed steady, one had peaks and valleys, parallel and perpendicular, before their super fight of 1987. And in the middle of that, the wild banquet in Baltimore in 82. And little did we know that doubleheader would have set the stage for, at that time, the biggest event in sports history. Because pull up all the financials and pull up all the numbers of that particular fight in terms of viewership and financials, it superseded a lot of things that night. And sometimes we build up fights a little too high. Maybe in this case, you couldn't build it up high enough, even when it got to that point. Because you talk about Leonard and Hagler, everybody wanted to see it. And when it got to that point, I mean, was it overflowing? Possibly. But maybe you could have kept it overflowing because that's how much the world wanted to see it. And when it came out, and when the fight was announced after Leonard retired after the Kevin Howard win, that wasn't even nearly in anybody's mind. And that wasn't until we saw Leonard's face, who did the commentary for the Hagler-Hearns fight on the HBO replay version. Hagler getting to the top didn't sit well with Leonard because Hagler had the distinction Leonard had for the longest time. As like Hagler stole the spotlight from him, and Leonard was just jealous of it. So there was a lot of buildup coming. Maybe the only fight outside of that had that kind of a buildup was Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson, but a whole different animal. But for that time, we talk about from the doubleheader to the banquet to Hagler and Leonard meeting each other after a Hagler win in Italy, to the banquet of Baltimore, to the Superfight in '87, and maybe the fiasco at the banquet at Caesar's Palace where Hagler told Leonard to go get a life. Wild careers and wild parallels between the two. And little did we know, this doubleheader was going to be the start of something historic. And that's exactly what happened when it started 46 years ago tonight. I've always said, we talk about these usually we have these doubleheaders. They do lead us. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And sometimes they do lead to something when you least expect it. And that's what we probably had with this doubleheader we talk about with Hagler and Leonard on free TV. I mean, maybe in hindsight, you just need to think about it for a second. A doubleheader featuring two of arguably the top 35 greatest fighters of all time sharing a doubleheader on free television. This is not pay-per-view or closed circuit. This was free TV. Whole world of watching on ABC's Wide World of Sports. Everyone was watching this. A lot of curiosity all the way around. But to have this on free TV, when this probably today, supersede $100+ on a pay-per-view card, tells you the impact Hagler and Leonard had and how this doubleheader started off just a wild string for the next 8 years in the sport, where these two became the focal points of the 80s, from that doubleheader all the way through that super fight of '87. And they were the talk of the town. And when they stepped up at the biggest stages, they stepped up and delivered. And that's what made them the talk of the town. It made them two of the 35 greatest fighters of all time. Little did we know that doubleheader in '79 was going to be the start of things. I mean, actually, they started it before they hit the start button. That should tell you what this doubleheader was about to ignite. I mean, they just blew the dynamite up. They set the dynamite. Duran and Hearns later on joined in, and they all lit the match. That's how this run took place. Terrific doubleheader. Marvin Hagler was victimized. And we talk about Hagler until Formal 1. And we talk about some of the worst decisions in boxing history. A lot of people have this as probably the most egregious. That was, of course, before Pernell Whitaker versus Jose Luis Ramirez in '88. That should tell you what Marvin Hagler had to fight through, because the boxing intelligentsia hardly bought into his act, and he rubbed them off the wrong way with some of the things that he complained about. And we talk about this doubleheader, complaining to Bob Arum about being on a doubleheader with Ray Leonard fighting for a title when he wanted the spotlight to himself. And Arum basically just told him the truth to his face. Look, you don't have the glitz and glamour like Leonard has. You don't have the it factor yet. You have to take a hard road. You got a title shot. Just be happy you got a title shot. Go out there and fight it. And Hagler basically did what he was supposed to do. Judges took it away from him. That's to tell you what Hagler had to fight through. There's also this misperception where Sugar Ray Leonard was gift-wrapped the career that he had. Look at the guy's career resume. Look at the guy's amateur background. And tell me that just landed on his lap. You're stupid if you think that. He had to work as hard as Hagler. It's just Marvin Hagler just, felt like Leonard got all the attention that he deserved. Leonard got all the credit that he wanted and he deserved. And Hagler, because he felt slighted in that regard, had to take the road he did. And it did pan out for him in the end. But still, can't deter the fact 2 of the 35 greatest fighters of all time shared the spotlight on that night of November 30th, 1979, and shared it again at a higher level on April 6th, 1987, on that super fight that set all kinds of records all over the place in terms of numbers and viewership, and a super fight that is still hotly debated debate. Did you guys think Leonard won the fight? Yeah, we thought he won the fight. Okay, you're right. Did you think Hagler won the fight? Yeah, we thought he won the fight. You're right. Was the fight a draw? Yeah, we thought it was a draw. You're right. Hagler Leonard is going to be debated forever and ever and ever. And I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the ride with this. Because I lived through that super fight, and I said all along, the biggest mistake Marvin Hagler made was conceding to Leonard's demands and blatantly giving away rounds, especially the first 4 rounds where he basically dug his grave on that one. And probably years later, he probably kicked himself over it. He probably says he won the fight. I mean, he's probably saying it. Of course, he's going to say it because he's a prideful warrior and a prideful fighter. But deep down in his head, he's probably thinking to himself, there's more I could have done to this guy, and I let him off the hook. That's going to be how this doubleheader, all the way to the super fight at 87, always going to parallel Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvelous Marvin Hagler. May God rest the soul of the great, marvelous Marvin Hagler. A terrific, terrific fighter, top 10 all-time great middleweight. And on that note, that'll wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. Back to the regulars tomorrow, week 14 picks. Also tomorrow night, an all-time great quarterback delivered a performance of the ages on Monday Night Football. And I talk about that and the significance of that one. If you missed tonight's show or any other shows I've had in the past, you can always listen to them on the Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio, and the Spotify apps. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in all walks of life. Always take care of you. Always focus on you. Respect others' boundaries. Don't let anyone step on your boundaries, and all good things will happen. Always take care of you and you first. And on that note, have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourselves. God bless, and enjoy the evening.